And now we have time for a few questions. I'm going to start with Laura and Nan, and maybe you can just start by telling us how your collaboration came about.
Nan and P.A.I.N, when they started the organization, they started documenting their actions, and they had filmed them for about 1.5 years, and I met Nan over a brunch. We were with the artist Hito Steyerl, German artist, and we were sort of strategizing another situation of toxic philanthropy. There was Jana Peel was the head of the Serpentine Gallery, and it came out that her husband was owner of NSO Group. So we met to write a letter, and with Hito, and then in the course of this, we, of course, talked about P.A.I.N, and I expressed my admiration for what they were doing. And she said, we've been documenting everything. And I was like, the documentarian in me said, thank God they're documenting. And then I said, if there's, if you ever need anything, let me know. And then right before that, she had a meeting with Howard Gertler and John Lyons. Do you want to talk about that?
I was interviewed for a Peter Hujar film. And through that, I met Howard Gertler and John Lyons, the producers. And I asked them if they knew how to raise some money for the film we'd been working on. We weren't just documenting the actions, we were documenting the meetings in my house every week. And we were also traveling around. And they said they would like to have Laura on the project. And that's how it came to be. And my first reaction was, I'm not important enough for Laura Poitras. I'm serious. I was very scared, and I was like, I don't have any state secrets. I don't have any documents to release, but it seems like I did have some documents to release.
My reaction was, how do I justify my existence in this film? Nan has been exquisitely making slideshows about her life. So I also had like a crisis of like, well, I've got nothing to contribute here. And
actually, I interviewed Laura one time. I turned the mic on her, and she told me very deep family secrets. So the next movie I'm making.
So, if I'm understanding correctly, initially it was documentation of P.A.I.N's activities, and then
P.A.I.N members.
By P.A.I.N members, but then this idea of making it a kind of film that has this sort of dual structure of of being about the activism and also about Nan, her life and work. Can you talk about when that idea crystallized?
Yeah, I mean, really quite early in one sense, because in our first meeting, which I was 20 minutes late for because it was a rainstorm, and then I showed up at her house and she had to loan me a shirt. And so, but then she told me about the show she had curated, Witnesses Against Our Vanishing. And she, even the title, I was sort of like, it took me aback. It's so powerful, and that she'd curated this, and then I just knew at that moment in our first meeting that this was going to be an anchor of the film, that it had to be, that the historical reverberations between the failure of our society to deal appropriately in that crisis and the failure again today and the things that motivate that there was such echoes going on. And so that I knew. And then seeing her work, and we started doing these interviews. And those interviews quickly, they were just audio, and quickly just opened up this kind of emotional depth that I hadn't anticipated beginning the film.
How much material did you have?
Yeah, it's impossible to answer.
Okay.
I mean,
There's a box of all the records of my sister. There's a huge box.
Mm-hmm.
And I gave her access to the box. Yeah.
I was curious about the idea of portraiture, which is a form that you both work in. And I'm wondering if you had conversations about the practice and art or portraiture as this project was taking shape.
I'm not big on talking about art. I mean, I don't really analyze the practice, but we found, like, I was making a new piece, Memory Lost. A little bit is in the slideshow, I mean in the film. And Laura stepped in and helped me edit because I was making it in front of her. And, you know, Laura and I both have trouble not giving our opinions. So I realized how good she was at editing. So we kind of met on that note too. But we never actually analyzed, oh, well, I don't remember if we ever analyzed what we were doing in those terms.
Yeah. I mean, for me, my films tend to be about people who are confronting a historical moment. And so they're about a larger sets of questions, but they're also about the individuals. And in that sense, yeah, I think of them as portraits, but also as hopefully at some level social critique. That this is hopefully that what P.A.I.N is doing and what they've drawn is not, it's about condemning the society that allowed this to happen and calling for structural change.
I'm going to bring our other guests in. Patrick, maybe you in the film you relate your first encounter with Nan. I'm wondering if you can talk about how that evolved as you saw what P.A.I.N was doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It sounds like our first encounters, Laura, were probably somewhat similar, but you had the foresight and the wisdom to see that Nan was actually really onto something. And there was just something kind of retro about everything you were saying about this kind of activism that you were proposing, Nan. And so I was sort of intrigued, but I did not think it was going to go anywhere. I mean, I had my own experience of writing about the Sacklers initially in that piece for the New Yorker. And so I think I had a sense of what the headwinds would be. I mean, what Nan and the group would be up against. But we stayed in touch, and these actions started to happen. And what struck me most, and you can see it in the film, is that it's a form of activism, obviously, but that the protests were framed like photos. It was all so visual. There was a kind of art in the demonstrations themselves. And so it was interesting. So then I got to know the group and covered it on my own and was sort of working on what became my book about all of this, but writing about all of this and then kind of somewhat in parallel to the film, and then was felt very fortunate to be able to contribute in some small way.
And maybe we can bring Megan and Harry into this as well, because what Patrick was describing is retro activism and using ACT UP as a model, really.
I think that that was before we started talking about ACT UP. I think at the beginning, I was going back to my, demonstrations against the Vietnam War. And I was talking about, brochures and, signs around the museums. I mean, I was very retro until I met these kids. And they're the ones who really, yeah. I mean, as a group, we planned, nothing was done by me in terms of that. It was done by all of us. And people would have ideas and they would pass off to the next one. And those two were very aware, and many of the other members, of what we were going up against visually and how to respond to each museum. I mean, I was there, but I was part of it. I wasn't definitely not drawing it. I mean, Harry was very influential in the Guggenheim, the protest and the whole drawing of that.
Yeah, I gotta say, I mean, having footage and being able to see it, the footage at the Guggenheim is pretty miraculous. Sandy Bauckham is here, I believe, in the audience, and took that footage, and I'm so grateful to see it now because I was in the 9th story throwing all the prescriptions down, so I didn't get to actually witness that beautiful moment, but to see it now, it sends chills down my spine, because it really, we started out planning actions and wanting to make sure we were doing it on free access days to museums, so there would be big crowds and people would see it, but also media would then see the large crowds and then carry that out. And to be able to create visuals that are impactful, and the New York Times photo of that Guggenheim action is just like the footage here. It's this aerial shot and people stopped when they saw it. And that was enough to catch people's attention to then show them these awfully heinous things that the Sacklers had said when it came to selling their drugs, despite the consequences, and scapegoating users who were in need or in order to hide their reckless profiteering. So I think creating those visuals and really hitting people would then give them the interest to listen long enough to see what had happened.
How many prescriptions? We should give people a sense of how many prescriptions it took to get that
We
visual.
were feeling very economical, so it was exactly 2 reams of paper cut into eighths, so it was 8,000.
And the first protest at the Met, it was 1,000 mock oxy pill bottles that we smuggled into plastic bags in our bags.
And I mean, that's the way the group was. We have Noemi Bonazzi, a great designer, came up with the label.
And Marina Barrio, who had so much experience organizing protests and knowing all of the bases to cover.
Right.
L.A. Kaufman, also a huge part of a lot of our actions. And our producers already said it, but there are representatives from other groups that we've worked with who really led us into grassroots activism in a way that I don't think we would have been so successful if we didn't have Vocal New York, Truth Farm, Housing Works, Act Up New York are all
Center for Popular Democracy.
And Robert Suarez is also another speaker. You see, he's not here tonight. He is here? He's not. He's not here tonight, but just people that we looked to lead the way when it came to speaking truth to power and doing what we could with P.A.I.N's attention and Nan's stature in the art world to bring this into a new venue and show people what had happened.
I also want to acknowledge that Barry Meyer is in the room, another journalist who did groundbreaking work on exposing this crisis. And he did this two decades ago. 2 decades ago, he put out the warning that what was happening and published it in the New York Times, and yet the government did nothing. And so I just think it's really important to acknowledge the work of investigative journalists and Patrick's work to sort of bring forward the Sackler name. They were very successful at staying in the shadows for a really long time. And then, but then the work that P.A.I.N had done that it wasn't, that journalism and being in the New York Times wasn't enough
Yeah.
to shame.
We never stopped thanking the journalists, though. I mean, Patrick wouldn't believe how much homage he got.
And yeah, just to reiterate what's been said, but with Patrick's reporting and other reporting that was happening, as well as documents that were being released in court, during the bankruptcy, COVID coincided with the bankruptcy, so we didn't have as many journalists watching the court as closely as we were. And when documents would roll in, we would think, how can we now take this to the public in a more public message? And I think that is a strong suit of what we do, like taking the AG's office, Sackler documents and bringing it to the prescriptions and taking these things. And I'm very proud to be a part of that kind of translation to the public.
Yeah, like ACT UP used to say, it's not about speaking to the media, but speaking through the media.
I mean, to the extent that the film itself is like an activist work, can you tell us what do you think the next steps are or should be? Or what are the questions, really?
So I think putting shame on the Sacklers, we've been pretty successful at that. But when it comes to the overdose crisis, I mean, shaming the Sacklers isn't going to save lives. And we have to take that stigma that has been put on people who use drugs and people in who suffer from chronic pain, and take that stigma and put it on people like the Sacklers. I mean, there are going to be other corporations that find ways to take advantage of people and industries. Damn the consequences. Damn however many deaths happen. And to prevent that kind of thing from happening again, we need to give compassion to the people that they scapegoat when it comes to committing their crimes and getting away with it.
There's also an interesting thing with the Purdue Pharma bankruptcy and with the other opioid distributors in bankruptcy is now there's billions of dollars in settlement at play. And, the grassroots organizations that we work with on the ground know what works and what saves lives, and they're not being heard. They're starting to be heard. but not nearly as much as we need them to. And opioid settlement spending should go to the right places. And we feel, yeah, thank you. We feel very strongly about that.
Yeah.
Because what we learned, and from big tobacco, is that often those settlements went into general funds and things like that, and we need that to not happen again.
Yeah, or worse, police funds, which, as Nan says in the film, we can't arrest ourselves. I have an overdose crisis. It has not worked for generations, and it continues to exacerbate the issue. New York is leading the way. We have 2 overdose prevention centers uptown right now. Yeah, please. They only opened last November. There's 2 centers uptown, and they've reversed over 500 overdoses already. Yeah. And Governor Hochul could authorize overdose prevention centers across the state tomorrow if she wanted to with an executive order, but she doesn't have the political will. There's fear, I'm sure, leading into a re-election, but people die every day. 12 New Yorkers die every day from overdose, and we don't have any upstate. We don't have any in Long Island, and they're even more resource-starved there than we are here, than drug users are here. So we can't have everybody in New York coming to Harlem and Washington Heights to use this one center. We need them everywhere, and we need to lead the way for the rest of the country to open them too.
I'm getting the sign that we only have time for one more. So I just want to maybe have Nan last word to you. I'm just curious to hear you talk about your experience being, I guess, a subject, being on the other side of the camera.
Would you want a 2-hour film about you? Jesus Christ. Are you kidding? That's my last word.
I think that's a great place to end. I want to thank you all for the film and for the work that you're all doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.